At 6:11 in the morning, my phone rang before the sun was even fully up. It was my bank manager, a woman named Diane, who I'd known for almost 9 years, who usually only called to remind me about CD renewals or to wish me happy birthday because she kept a note of it in her system, always signing off with the same friendly line about hoping I'd treat myself to something nice. Her voice that morning was different, careful, the kind of careful people use right before they tell you something has gone very wrong.
"Mr. Doyle," she said, "I need you to stay calm, but I need you to come into the branch as soon as you can. There's been activity on your account overnight that I think you need to see for yourself." I asked her what kind of activity. She paused just long enough for my stomach to drop before she said it. "Sir, someone emptied your account. $341,000 transferred out in 4 separate withdrawals between 1 and 4 this morning."
I want to tell you, before anything else, that I knew exactly who done it before I even hung up the phone. And what I found out over the next 72 hours didn't just cost me money. It cost me the last illusion I had about my own family. My name is Frank. I'm 74 years old. And this is the story of the morning I found out my son-in-law had been planning to disappear with 3 decades of my life savings, and the one phone call that stopped him before he got away with it. If you've ever trusted someone with something you couldn't afford to lose, stay with me, because this story isn't finished until the very end, and the ending is not what you'd expect. And if stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe, because I've got more of them to tell. Let me back up, not to that morning, to 18 months earlier, when all of this actually started, quietly, the way these things always seem to start. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer, caught late, gone within a year of the diagnosis. 39 years of marriage, and then just me, in a house that suddenly felt 3 sizes too big, with a lawn I no longer had any reason to keep tidy, and a kitchen table set for one, and closets still full of her cardigans I couldn't bring myself to sort through for the better part of 2 years. I have one daughter, Claire. She's my whole world, has been since the day she was born, 6 weeks early, so small I could hold her entire body in one forearm while the nurses hovered nearby. Terrified myself in a way I never fully admitted to Eleanor at the time. After Eleanor died, Claire started calling me every single day, checking in, bringing dinner over on Sundays, sitting with me at that too large kitchen table, even when neither of us had much to say. I want you to understand that none of what happened diminishes how much I love my daughter, or how grateful I was for those visits. Because grief is a lonely animal, and she kept it from swallowing me whole. Claire married Marcus 6 years ago, 2 years before Eleanor passed. I liked him well enough at the start. Charming, quick with a joke, always had some new business idea he was excited about. The kind of man who filled a room with energy the moment he walked into it. He'd worked in commercial real estate for a while, then switched to some kind of consulting, then mentioned over one Thanksgiving dinner that he was getting into private equity. I didn't fully understand what that meant, and I don't think, looking back, that he fully understood it either. But he talked about it with such confidence, such easy certainty, that I assumed he knew what he was doing. Eleanor used to say Marcus could sell sand in a desert and make you feel lucky to have bought it. I laughed when she said that. I understand it differently now. About 18 months ago, not long after Eleanor's first anniversary passed, Marcus started coming around more, helping with things around the house, fixing the cutter, mowing the lawn on Saturdays without being asked, bringing over a 6-pack and staying an extra hour just to talk, or so it seemed. At the time, I thought it was kindness. I thought, this is what a good son-in-law does when he sees his wife's father struggling alone. And I let myself feel grateful for it, the way you're grateful for anything that makes an unbearably quiet house feel a little less empty.
It was during one of those Saturday visits that he brought up my finances for the first time. "Frank," he said, standing in my driveway with a rake in his hand, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "Have you thought about what happens if something happens to you? Medically, I mean. Claire worries about it. If you had an emergency and needed someone to access funds quickly, pay for a procedure, handle a hospital bill before insurance kicks in, you'd want someone who could move fast, right?"
I told him I had a will. I had power of attorney documents drawn up years earlier, naming Claire, not Marcus, as my healthcare proxy. He nodded, said that made sense, but mentioned, almost offhand, the way people mention things they've actually rehearsed a dozen times in their head before saying them out loud, that a joint account might be simpler, faster. No lawyers, no waiting on paperwork if something happens suddenly. Just quick access in an emergency to make sure I was taken care of. I want to be honest with you about something. At 72 years old, having just lost my wife, having watched Eleanor's medical bills pile up in her final months while insurance companies dragged their feet on approvals, sending denial letters 2 weeks after we needed the answer, the idea of quick access in an emergency sounded like exactly the kind of peace of mind I needed. I didn't think of it as handing over control. I thought of it as insurance, a safety net, built by family, for family, the same way I'd have done anything for Eleanor without a second thought during those brutal final months. 3 weeks later, I sat down with Marcus at my bank, not Diane's branch, a different one, closer to his office, which I didn't think much of at the time, though I've turned that detail over in my mind 100 times since. And I added him as a joint owner on my primary savings account. Full access. Not power of attorney, not a supervised arrangement, but full, equal, no questions asked joint ownership. The same as if he'd built that account himself, dollar by dollar, the way I had over 41 years of working as an electrical contractor, up before dawn most mornings of my adult life, wiring houses and commercial buildings across 3 counties. I didn't tell Claire the specifics. I assumed Marcus would. I assumed, frankly, that this was something the two of them had discussed together as a couple, out of shared concern for me. I found out much later that Claire had no idea the account had been set up that way at all. For over a year, nothing seemed unusual. Marcus never touched the account, as far as I could tell. I checked my statements the way I always had, out of habit more than suspicion, a routine left over from decades of running my own small contracting business, where every dollar had to be accounted for. The balance stayed steady. I genuinely believed for that entire year that I had made a reasonable, careful decision, the kind Eleanor herself would have approved of. Then, about 4 months ago, small things started to shift. Marcus mentioned at a family dinner that his consulting business had landed a major opportunity. Some kind of investment fund he was helping launch with a group of guys he'd met at a conference in Miami. He talked about it constantly at every dinner after that. Projected returns, early investor positions, the language people use when they've convinced themselves and are trying very hard to convince you that something is a sure thing. He showed me a slide deck once on his phone, full of charts I didn't fully understand and didn't ask enough questions about, because I trusted the man. I asked him, casually, if he needed anything from me. He said no, absolutely not. He had it handled. He just wanted to share the excitement with the family. And something in the too quick certainty of that answer should have told me more than it did at the time. Around that same time, Claire started seeming distant during our Sunday dinners, distracted. Once I caught her staring at her phone with an expression I didn't recognize on her, somewhere between worry and exhaustion, before she noticed me watching and quickly put it away, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. When I asked if everything was all right between her and Marcus, she said, "We're just going through some stuff, Dad. Nothing to worry about." I want you to hold on to that phrase because it comes back later. Nothing to worry about. 2 weeks before that 611 phone call, I stopped by their house unannounced, dropping off a toolbox Marcus had borrowed months earlier and never returned.
Through the garage window, before anyone knew I was there, I saw him on the phone, pacing, his voice raised in a way I'd never heard from him before, sharp and desperate underneath the usual polish.
"I told you, the fund is short," he was saying. "I need the rest by Friday, or the whole position collapses and I lose everything I already put in. There's one more account I can pull from. It's basically already mine. I just need a few more days to move it clean." I stood there in that driveway for a long time after he hung up, holding a toolbox, putting pieces together I hadn't wanted to put together. It's basically already mine. I didn't confront him that day. I want to explain why, because I know some of you might think I should have. I wasn't certain yet. I told myself there could be another explanation, another account, a business account, something that had nothing to do with me. I drove home and told myself I was being paranoid, an old man seeing threats in an ordinary conversation, the way grief sometimes makes you suspicious of good fortune you haven't earned back yet. 4 days later, at 6:11 in the morning, my phone rang. I got to the bank branch by 8:30, still in yesterday's shirt, my hands shaking slightly as I signed in at the front desk. Diane met me in a small back office, a folder already open on her desk, printouts spread across it like evidence at a trial. 4 withdrawals, she said, sliding the papers toward me, all between 1 and 4 a.m. 3 wire transfers to an account I can't trace past an intermediary bank, and 1 cash withdrawal of $40,000 from an ATM with a daily limit override that required a phone authorization. Phone authorization, I repeated.
"Someone called our after-hours fraud line," Diane said carefully. "Identified themselves using your account information and your joint owner's credentials and authorized the override. Mr. Doyle, I have to ask you directly, did you authorize any of these transactions?" I told her the truth. No, I hadn't authorized anything. I'd been asleep in my own bed the entire night, and I told her so, my voice cracking slightly on the words, embarrassed at 74 years old to feel my eyes suddenly stinging in front of a woman I mostly knew through routine paperwork.
"The joint owner on this account is your son-in-law, is that correct?" I said yes. Diane's face did something I'll never forget, a kind of professional neutrality that couldn't quite mask the sympathy underneath it. The look of someone who has delivered this particular kind of news to enough frightened elderly customers to recognize exactly what it does to a person's face when they hear it. "I want to be honest with you," she said, "because the joint owner has full legal access to this account. This isn't technically bank fraud from our perspective. From our systems, this looks like an authorized joint owner moving his own money. Whether it's fraud in a broader legal sense, whether he had the right to do this given whatever agreement exists between you two, that's going to depend on documentation, intent, and possibly criminal investigation. I can freeze the account right now to stop any further withdrawals, but I need you to understand, the $301,000. 41 years of electrical contracting work, careful saving, a life insurance payout from Elamo's passing I'd never touched because I couldn't bring myself to spend money that existed only because she was gone. Gone in 3 hours, while I slept, while I dreamed, as far as I can remember, of nothing at all. I called Claire from the parking lot of that bank, sitting in my truck, my hands still shaking too badly to properly grip the steering wheel. She picked up on a second ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Dad, it's early. What's wrong?" I told her. All of it. The phone call, the withdrawals, the amount. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Claire, I need you to come here," she said, her voice suddenly sharp, awake, urgent in a way I'd never heard from my daughter before. "Right now. Marcus left for the airport an hour ago. He told me he had an early flight for a work conference. Dad, I think you need to come here right now." I drove to their house faster than I probably should have. Running one yellow light I still feel guilty about. Claire met me at the front door, still in her pajamas, holding her laptop open, her face pale, in a way that made her look, for just a moment, like the frightened 6-week-old baby I'd once held in one forearm. "I couldn't sleep after he left," she said, letting me in. Something felt wrong about the way he said goodbye. He hugged me for too long. He told me he loved me twice, which he never does before a normal business trip. So I checked his email on our shared family calendar account. We've had joint access to it for years for scheduling. And Dad, I found something. She turned the laptop toward me.
An email sent to himself 3 days earlier. Subject line, simply, checklist. Inside was a list. Flight confirmation to a country with no extradition treaty with the United States. A hotel reservation for 6 weeks. A separate banking app confirmation showing a newly opened account overseas. And near the bottom, a note that made my blood run cold. Frank's account, clean by Thursday morning. Transfer complete before he's even awake. He had planned this. Not panicked, not desperate. Planned it. In writing, days in advance. Timed precisely around when an old man asleep in his own house wouldn't notice until it was already done.
"Dad," Claire said, and I watched my daughter's composure finally crack completely, tears streaming down a face that had been holding steady for weeks, maybe months, without me even realizing it. "I think he's been planning to leave. Not just with your money. I found messages. I think there's someone else. I think this was never just about the investment fund. I think the fund was real, and it failed. And instead of telling either of us, he decided the easiest way out was to take everything and disappear before anyone found out."
I want to tell you what happened over the next several hours, because it moved faster than I ever thought something like this could move.
Claire called her own attorney immediately, not Marcus's business contacts, a family friend named Priya, who'd handled her employment contracts for years and answered on the first ring despite the early hour. And within 40 minutes, we had a plan. Diane, back at the bank, confirmed that the wire transfers hadn't fully cleared their receiving institution yet. International transfers of that size trigger additional compliance holds. Something Marcus either hadn't known or had gambled wouldn't matter if he was already out of the country by the time anyone noticed.
Priya got us in touch with the bank's fraud investigation unit and separately filed an emergency report with local police, citing the email as evidence of premeditative theft from a joint account holder, a nuance in the law that, as it turns out, matters enormously. Because while a joint owner has legal access to funds, using that access as part of a documented plan to defraud and flee crosses a very different legal line than simply moving money you're entitled to. Priya explained it to us at Claire's kitchen table, patient and precise, even as the three of us were running on adrenaline and
Cold coffee, sketching out on a legal pad exactly which laws applied and which pieces of evidence mattered most. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the wire transfers were frozen mid-transit, still recoverable, still sitting in a compliance hold at an intermediary bank in New York before they could clear to the overseas account. The $40,000 cash withdrawal was gone, untraceable, but the remaining $261,000, still technically in motion, not yet in Marcus's hands, could, with enough legal pressure and enough speed, potentially be clawed back.
Marcus never made that flight. Airport security flagged him during a routine document check, unrelated to any of this, just an expired passport renewal he apparently hadn't noticed in his rush to finalize everything else. And by the time he'd sorted it out and missed his boarding window, police were already waiting to speak with him about a fraud complaint filed that morning.
I didn't go to the airport. I didn't want to see his face in that moment. And honestly, some part of me was afraid of what I might feel if I did. Relief or rage or something in between that I wasn't ready to name yet. I stayed at Claire's kitchen table instead, holding my daughter while she cried, the two of us going through years of small warning signs neither of us had wanted to see clearly at the time.
The late nights he explained away, the sudden trips, the way he'd started keeping his phone face down even at home.
Here's what I want to tell you about the weeks that followed, because I think it matters more than the dramatic morning at the airport. The legal process took months, not hours. Recovering money that's already been set into motion through wire transfers is slow, bureaucratic, full of paperwork and compliance departments and lawyers billing by the hour, phone calls that went unanswered for days, forms that needed notarizing twice because the first version had a formatting error nobody caught until it bounced back. In the end, we recovered $240,000 of the $341,000. Not all of it. The $40,000 in cash was gone entirely, and legal fees, ironically, ate into another chunk of what we did recover. Marcus was charged, eventually, though I won't pretend the legal outcome felt as satisfying as the moment in Claire's kitchen when we first found that email. These things rarely resolve as cleanly in real life as they do in the retelling. Claire filed for divorce 3 weeks after that morning. It wasn't just the money, she told me later. It was the discovery, buried in those messages, that Marcus had indeed been planning to leave with someone else, someone from that Miami conference, someone he'd apparently been building a second life around for the better part of a year, while still coming to my house on Saturdays to mow my lawn and rake my leaves and ask careful, rehearsed questions about emergency access to my savings. I sold the house eventually, not out of fear, but because it felt right to start smaller, simpler, closer to Claire, who moved into a place 10 minutes from mine after the divorce finalized. I don't have a joint account with anyone anymore. I have a power of attorney document, carefully drafted, naming Claire and only Claire, with clear limitations and a co-signing requirement from Priya's law firm for anything over $5,000. It's not because I don't trust my daughter. It's because I learned, at 74 years old, in the worst possible way, that trust and access are two very different things, and conflating them nearly cost me everything I spent a lifetime building. Diane still calls me sometimes, just to check in. Last month, she told me I was the reason her branch changed their after-hours authorization protocol, requiring a callback verification for any override above $10,000. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I like to think something good came out of that morning, beyond just getting some of the money back. Claire and I have Sunday dinners again, the same as we did after Eleanor passed, except now it's just the two of us at my new, smaller kitchen table. And sometimes we talk about that morning, and sometimes we don't talk about it at all, and both feel right depending on the day. She started therapy a few months ago, something I encouraged gently but never pushed, and she tells me it's helping her understand how a smart, capable woman ends up not seeing something for so long. I tell her the same thing happened to me, an electrician who wired half the buildings in this county and still couldn't see what was happening in his own driveway. There's one more piece of this I haven't told you yet, because I think it matters more than anything that happened in that courtroom or that airport. About 2 months after the divorce papers were filed, I ran into one of Marcus's old business partners at the hardware store, a man named Gary who I'd met a handful of times at family barbecues over the years. He looked uncomfortable the moment he recognized me, the way people do when they're carrying something they're not sure they should say out loud. We ended up talking in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes, and what he told me filled in the last piece of the picture I hadn't wanted to look at directly. The investment fund had never really existed in the way Marcus described it. It had started as something real, a small group of investors pooling money for a commercial property deal. But within the first few months, Marcus had used investor funds to cover his own mounting personal debts. A habit, Gary said carefully, that predated the fund entirely, going back to a string of bad decisions in the years before he even met Claire. By the time he came to me about the joint account, he wasn't seeking emergency access for my benefit at all. He was already underwater, already looking for a way out. And an elderly father-in-law grieving his wife, eager to feel useful and protective again, must have looked like exactly the kind of soft, trusting target he needed.
I sat in my truck in that parking lot for a long time after Gary walked away, turning that over in my mind. It didn't feel like anger anymore, not by that point. It felt more like grief for a version of events I'd wanted to believe in, that Marcus had simply made one desperate, out-of-character decision under pressure, rather than the truth, which was that he'd been circling something like this for longer than any of us had known him.
I told Claire what Gary had said. She took it better than I expected, actually. It almost makes it easier, she told me, knowing it was never really about us at all. It was just who he already was, and we happened to be standing closest when it finally caught up with him. I think about that phone call a lot. 6:11 in the morning, Diane's careful voice, the particular kind of fear that comes from realizing the ground you thought was solid has been quietly hollowed out beneath you for over a year. But I think about the other phone call too, the one I made to Claire from that parking lot, and the way she opened her door before I'd even finished explaining, and the way we sat at her kitchen table for 6 hours straight, rebuilding something between us that Marcus's betrayal had, in some strange way, actually made stronger. I've thought a lot, too, about what I'd say to another father in my position, sitting across from a son-in-law or daughter-in-law who seems eager, helpful, full of good reasons why quick access might save the day someday. I'm not saying don't trust your family. I trusted mine, and in the end, it was my own daughter who saved me. Not despite trusting Marcus, but because she trusted her own instincts enough to check a laptop at 5 in the morning instead of going back to sleep. What I'm saying is this: convenience and safety are not the same thing, and anyone who tells you otherwise, however kindly, however sincerely, is asking you to hand them something you can't easily take back. You don't always get all your money back. I want to be honest about that, because I know some of you have lived through something similar, and I don't want to promise you a fairy tale ending that doesn't match your own experience. But you can get your family back. You can get your clarity back. And sometimes that turns out to matter more than the number on a bank statement ever did. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever trusted the wrong person with something you couldn't afford to lose, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you want to know what happened at Marcus's sentencing, and what Claire said to him the one time she saw him in that courtroom, that's a story too. Let me know. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.